All right, so here we are at the Haley Ranch in Hemphill County, just east of Canadian, Texas, on a beautiful late spring day. Uh, we'll get a lot more video as we go along, but when we get started here, why don't uh, Jim Haley is here with us this morning, and some of his family members will be joining us later on. But Jim, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the family and the ranch and how you all got started and how you moved up to this part of the world, and kind of start in the old days, and we'll work forward.
Very well. Well, this place where we're sitting today was it was came through my maternal grandfather's line. My grandfather came here, and great grandfather came here in 1887, and he came down from the Midwest. They were in probably Illinois, and came down through Kansas, and he'd heard about range cattle, and he was in some other endeavors, but he was interested in cattle, and he wanted places to graze his land. And as the Santa Fe Railroad was moving west on the tracks from Chicago to LA, and he wasn't very long behind the railroad as it came to this country. And of course, as the settlement went, and the Indians were mostly by then, they were back in Oklahoma and various on their reservations, and then you had the trail drivers were coming north out of central Texas after the war between the states, and all the cattle that they had that were running mostly wild in the central Texas, and they came in there, and a lot of those trail drivers would gather those cattle and move them north on the hoof, on the trails, to service the railroad people that were in need of protein and all. So there was a need, and it was an area that was probably geographically at the time it was well suited for the movement of livestock as it went north to service and populate the northern ranges too, as they were settling a lot of that, lands in Wyoming and Montana and western and Colorado and so forth. But back to our family, he got here, and he started acquiring a little bit of land, and then he had several children, of which my grandfather was one, and then a depression hit in 1929, and things were really tough, and my granddad was able to get away and go to college, but then times were tough, and he had to come back and kind of bear down and stay with the place. And anyway, that's just kind of the background of where we got started. And then my mother was interested, and she married a rancher on my dad's side. And I guess, so you could say, in a manner of speaking, I was double bred to do this. And I think that, I really never wanted to do anything else, because I had it on both sides of my family, and I was always interested in livestock and the husbandry of it and the care, and I just wanted to be out. I think it's wonderful to be out in nature, to be with them, and to see so many various different things that we're so blessed to have the opportunity to view and experience things, because we're often out at times of the day and in nature when a lot of people don't get to be, or are not, because of their various careers and what they do. So it's a blessed place to be, in my opinion, but it's not for everybody, obviously. And so I don't know if that covers some of the aspects that you wanted to discuss about that.
Was this the original headquarters here where we're at?
Well, no, actually, between here and Canadian, which is the next, it's 7 miles. We're basically 7 miles from here. Actually, my grandfather had a place this side of Canadian, about a couple of miles, and there was a bridge, which was way before my time, that crossed the Canadian River back almost due north and a little bit east of here. And that was, I think, one of the first bridges before the railroad actually built across at Canadian. Anyway, the point being, he had a place this side of town, and they were in town on a Sunday, and the story goes, and they got word there was a fire at their headquarters. And there's an old silo between here and Canadian, which still stands on the north side of the blacktop. And that silo was where my maternal grandfather was born in 1901. And so that original headquarters, I guess you would say, where my great grandfather had started kind of acquiring land, was burned. But after that, he built a house in Canadian, and then, you know, as a way to help, you know, augment the income or whatever after the Depression and all, my grandfather was looking for things to do and to try to supplement the income, as I said, and he started a commission firm. And that was in the days before video conferencing and all the days, and you had to know what the cattle weighed pretty much by mind and sight, and you had to, you know, be good for your word, obviously, to explain and describe the cattle. But he had a lot of customers scattered out, I think, through the Midwest and always some to Florida. I know my mother told me about a load of cattle, or a train, that he sold to a man in Florida. And the man said, yes, I will take them, but on the condition that you see them through. So he traveled through on the train, and actually he took my mother and grandmother with him. They all got to go, and my mother told the story that when he stopped, the train would stop or whatever. Well, he would get out of the car and go down the rail and check on how the cattle were making the fare. And kind of an interesting sideline to that, but it speaks to the people kind of, I think, in our industry, in their word and what they do and how they're expected, you know, and the honor behind it. When they got those cattle through to Florida, it so happened that the man had passed away that had ordered them for my grandfather. But his widow said, well, my husband ordered them, and I'm going to take them. I'm going to make it good. And so, you know, it was a sad experience from the man that had dealt with my grandfather, but, you know, she knew the cattle were like they'd been represented to be, and so they were turned down. I mean, not turned down, and they were accepted. But anyway, that's a little aside from some of the history and just kind of how it worked out. And
well, we were visiting a little bit earlier about your grandfather, and you were telling me kind of about the time you came along and how he kind of talked about generations of the ranch and going back to what you were able to learn from some of the older guys.
Well, Bruce, I think I would say that I was very fortunate in terms of the time frame. And when I was born with both of my grandfathers, so happened to be both born in 1901. And on my dad's side of the family, my granddad Haley was a historian, range cattle history in Texas, and he wrote the definitive biography of Charles Goodnight. And so I was at a period in his life. My grandmother had passed away, and then my other one passed away a little later. And so I guess you could say I had the benefit of being able to be around those old timers at a formative age for me, and I was able to just be with them when they could convey a lot of just experience, things that they had been told and learned from the old timers. And then both of them had gone through the Depression. So they knew what it was to scrimp and try to do without, to try to get yourself a toehold in the business and come up, you know, and stay and live through drought and try to just whatever it took to try to stay and be involved in the business. And I guess as I would say, I look back on my life now and I think, what a blessing in a way that I was able to be around the men of that kind of fiber. you know, and those men had been before them that they had learned from. And so I think, as I say, I just had that opportunity, and I think it was a good blend. And then now, as we carry on, and I'm sure before the day or tomorrow's over, you know, you'll have a lot more technical questions to get into about where we've gone forward with that process of our business as it sort of evolved through the years. So I guess in one manner of speaking, we've tried to, we had the heritage and the old time ways, but we realized that, look, you know, that's not going to sustain you in terms of, you know, times change. And if you don't change with some of the modern techniques, you can, as technology's gotten so much better and we have so much better access to genetics and through, you know, research schools and all, and we try to capitalize on that, and we're fortunate to be able to do that through all of the work that the, you know, like institutions like your Texas A&M have done. So
Oh, good. Appreciate that. So, a little bit of old family history. Can you tell us a little bit about right now who's involved? You know, your brother Jeff, of course, has some more
Right.
country, and you guys pretty much partner back and forth. And you've got some
Right.
kids that are coming along,
Right.
and the ladies,
Right.
Lauren and
So
and
we've been, my brother and I have been in business together since I guess 1983. I believe that's right, and we've had a wonderful relationship. I can't imagine anything being better in the terms of, you know, we've just I don't know how to describe it. I don't really know that there is a way particularly, except we've just had that relationship where we've sort of always just, I asked Jeff when he was just getting out of college, I said, say, you know, I'm going to be in this business. I want to be in the cattle business, and I want to be with livestock and so forth. And would you like to be my partner? And he said, well, yes. And anyway, my grandfather had given us a few cows, and we took that nucleus. I think it was actually, my dad was a partner in the business at that time when we first started, and my dad was half, and my brother and I were, I guess you'd say, a quarter each. Yeah. But I asked Jeff if he wanted to be my partner, and so he was a half, and we started out with 60 cows. And 30 of those would have been my father's. And so I guess in a way of speaking, I could have had 15 and my brother had 15. And we just went from there. And we, as I alluded to in the Depression and how my granddads were both raised, you know, we'd been kind of drilled into our head, you know, to try to, you might be crawling before you're running, but you might best not carry a huge debt load if you can avoid it. Not to say we never did, never have, but we did a lot of our business just, there were probably some opportunities that we might have not been able to, or passed up on, but in a way, you know, I don't know, history would say, or didn't say, you know, that'll be for the history books, but you know, we were able to just kind of climb up slowly.
well, I guess you've come a ways. We're going to be breeding 270 yearling replacement heifers tomorrow, so that's a ways from 60 cows.
Well, anyway, we've but I guess I would say, you know, people, you know, it doesn't matter what business or what people like to do, but I remember again years ago having listened to some old men that were successful in their own right in completely other businesses aside from ours, and they both of them separately said, you know, do what you love and enjoy if you can, because that will make your work so much better, and hopefully then the success part will follow that. But if you're able to do what's in your heart and what you're able to, you know, if you're able to do that, and I guess you would say, you know, I've been blessed to be able to do that. And it was a follow of an interest that I wanted to do. And obviously I've had a good team behind me. If I, the team is what it's all about. I couldn't have done any of this without the team that's back there behind me, and good people, good help, good spouses, good things. And I would say another thing, and I've said this in the past, that has benefited my brother and me tremendously, and that is our wives get along. They're friends. They're not related other than they married brothers. But they don't get involved when my brother and I are talking business. And being the fact that they are friends with each other, there's no cross currents or rancor that my brother and I feel that's coming from them. They let us do our business, and I think that's also a benefit because they don't get involved in it other than be supportive of what we do, but they don't get involved in the little pettiness of trying to say you said this or he said that, and the day-to-day stuff. And they let us take the crew and run with our business, and I'm sure there's things they do. They tell each other of us, well, you're kind of staying late tonight, or what? We got to do those heifers on Sunday? Are you kidding? Those kind of things. But other than that, they don't. They're supportive.
Tell us a little bit maybe about the kind of cattle you're raising now, and compared to what you used to have, and how that's kind of evolved.
Well, if you go back in the early history of our ranch, well, both of my on both sides, they were involved in the Hereford business. Hereford people. That's kind of what this country was. People had Hereford, and then my dad, he was interested in. I guess it was probably the early late late 1960s, and when artificial insemination was kind of getting going, and he got interested in the limousine business. And then I had some cousins on the other side of the family that were involved in Charolais business, and we got a herd that we ran for some years that was a Charolais and limousine, in other words, the continental breeds. We ran them for several years, but Jeff and I discovered that, well, for example, the cattle were, it's not exactly where the market wanted to be. There were some niche things with that business and some lean beef programs and all, but we felt like we were giving up some weight or some marketing, when marketing opportunities on then that would be just on the steer side, on the beef side. And not to mention, because those females, they were not really as sought after. And so when we changed our breeding to get into the Angus and Red Angus and went more to the Continental bloodline, we were able to capitalize on a much better market for the females. And then we tried to pay attention to things like docility. And I think that the Red Angus and the Black Angus, if by golly, it's fun to strap on a pair of leggings and spurs and take down your rope and go after some cattle. But the older you get, and if you've been through a few wrecks, and in the way the cattle business and the industries run now, people need them to be where they can handle them, and where they can. And I think that speaks largely. The industry has done a lot of focus too on now. Getting the animals, and it speaks to where we need to be from an industry standard. I mean, people need to know we take care of them. This is what we do because we want the animals to be handled in a proper manner. We want them to be taken care of because we like them. First, we like them, and second of all, they're not doing any good if you're chousing them around. So we try to limit that and make it as good as it is. And I have a personal view, but I think the better they are, the more calm, the more gentle type of an animal, the better the beef will be, the better the dining experience.
Yeah. agree with that. So we were talking a little bit earlier about your heifers, and we'll get into that probably some more tomorrow. But you were saying you basically keep all your heifers as a kind of a stocker enterprise, and
Yeah.
till yearlings at least, till they've had their first breeding.
Well, I don't. Yes, we tried to make the animal fit the environment. And so we, through the years, I was mentioning the continental cattle. We've tried to downsize our cow some because we feel like it's a better fit with the rainfall we get. We don't get the big rains or the amount of moisture you do further east, and we don't have we can't provide here. Pretty much they just have to wrap their hide around grass, and that's what we try to have a fit for that kind of animal that suits our environment.
So your supplementation program is basically cubes and grass.
That's right. Now, understand, of course, that you can get caught here because we're far enough north in where we live. You can get caught in a storm if you don't have some hay laid in for the winter. I've told my son John, I said, look, you better plan to have, best for here, you might need to plan to have, a half a month's hay on hand, because I've seen the time when it can cover up, and obviously then they have to be fed, and there's times when they have to be fed every bite they get every day while that lasts. But generally the sun comes up, it's not like it is, another 200 miles north of here where you can cover up longer periods.
So we're talking about, you're all commercial cattle.
Yes. Yes.
How do you sell your steers and stuff? I mean, do you go through an order buyer, or how do you market those
Yes.
steers?
So typically, we've been selling on video auction. We've been using Superior. I like that. That's an opportunity, I think, for our kind of cattle to get out, in terms of they can get out and be viewed because of the video and the way they do the things. They have an opportunity to be seen and viewed all over the United States, and we're fortunate to have good people that we work through in that business with our reps and all, and that are involved in, some of them are involved. They're ag people just like we are, so they're involved. They understand. We understand the industry, and we can speak, the same language, so to speak, across our industries, and so that helps too. Now, I do believe, I do like and want to support local sale barns as well, because I think that, if we were to ever get in an industry where we were all locked down into one particular place with only one market, and that was it might be detrimental to those of us out here producers.
So they all kind of work together in the greater scheme of things.
Yes.
Local markets as well as more central markets.
Yes. And we, as you know so well, but we do use artificial insemination, as we're going to do with these heifers tomorrow, and then we buy registered bulls. So from the commercial side, so our typical program, what we've been doing for the last few years, is we AI our first calf heifers, and then from then on we're just completely, we turn registered bulls out with our cows after that. And one thing we're trying to do with that is we feel like we're tightening our breeding window, and it allows us to make those cows more reproductively efficient, and that's what we want to do, because after all, in this industry, the cost is the same. At the end of the year, you've still written all the same checks pretty much for grass lease and all those kind of things. So if you don't, your windmill's still pumping and all those parts and repairs and so forth. So, to have, so to speak, something out here that's dead weight, or it's not producing, that hits you hard in the bottom line.
Also, we were visiting a little bit about, you and Jeff have, home country ranches, and you've also leased some more country around.
Yes.
And Maybe tell us a little bit about the strategy there.
Well, I would say, I kind of hark back to my grandfather, and I remember one of them was describing one time. He said, there'd be some talk in the family. So why don't we just get it one place and just have one spot and just do it all right there, okay? But then he would say, well, but 20 miles down the road, they may have caught a rain that you didn't catch, or vice versa. And like in our country here, we can have, if you've experienced and seen, we can have those terrible range fires. Well, maybe the range fire didn't burn one place, and so you've got an opportunity. It's kind of like not all your eggs are in one basket, so to speak. You're a little more diversified, if you will. And obviously you've known us long enough to seen where we've taken some heavy hits, but we were able to have a little bit of reserve. I mean, a place that we weren't completely out, So I think that was also a blessing and a benefit. And so my brother and I, back to our history in the ranching between the two of us, so he has his place and where he lives, and here where we're sitting, and where I live, and we have these ranches. And the way we do our business is our cow herds run is a one unit. And so if back to the rain and the conditions, nature, if he's had rain that I didn't, or vice versa, we have the benefit of just being able to, pick up the phone or look at the range after a rain and say, well, I think we can take a few extra cattle over here, or no, man, don't talk to me, I'm full. I'm needing some relief, and we have that benefit of being able to move our livestock around where we need to move them, and back to the lease country, and we do have that as well, and we've got some lease country that we operate on as well. So we operate on both and leased land and deeded land, and so I don't know if that answered your question exactly.
It does. You were also mentioning one of the bad fires, maybe back in the '90s, down on
Yes.
Jeff, where everybody was kind of out.
Right.
And you had some neighbors that kind of pitched in and helped you out there.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think at the time that was one of the worst fires of modern time. And you would have had to gone back probably to the times of the Indians, when, a lightning strike or whatever, and it burned from the Canadian to the, Red River or whatever. But that was one of the worst fires of modern time. And neighbors, they pull together and they're so good, and the fire departments, and what they do out here to try to save the range, and it's just frankly amazing what they're able to accomplish in coordinated efforts among the neighbors and the departments, and also everybody's kind of pulling the same wagon, so to speak. But in the bad fires that burned off, when the big news media, CNNs and all that, they came to that, it was when the fire, at first, the first reports, they said that fire, might have burned nearly 1 million acres. Well, when they flew it and they finally got their data together, it was not that much. But anyway, it was a significant, and I forget the final figures, not near that much. But the point is, it burned a lot of people completely out. Like, for example, my place where my brother lives, I think I've heard that place was burned out in like maybe 15 minutes or so, the whole thing, with those 30 and 40 mile an hour winds and that fuel, it was like a perfect storm for fires that year, obviously, and it was just tragic. The sad thing that was so bad, Bruce, was seeing those animals that had suffered, and not only the ones that passed away, I mean, in the fire and the heat that just caught them, but not only that, but the post-fire trauma to the animals in terms of just the grass, that got to the udders, the heat from the fuel. And so you had that, and we did our best. And, of course, not ever having gone through something that that disastrous, you know, we had to learn a lot of, you know, it's kind of baptism by fire, if you will, in the literal and figurative sense. And so there were times when, you know, like a mama cow's udder, we would think, well, the calf's, okay, it's going all right maybe, but then there ended up being scar tissue that we didn't really realize in there. So in the next year, even doing our best, in the next year, we tried to figure out and, you know, make arrangements for those animals that had suffered that from their, you know, milk capacity. But we discovered in the next year we didn't get them all. You know, there was ones that we didn't, you know, some of it was, you know, some of it of course was visual, but not all. But
Oh,
anyway,
that was a.
and the horses and the cattle and the calves and just the poor doggies. And we, like you said, back to friends and neighbors and pulling together, you know, just the things you remember. One of our very dear friends, he showed up with his son in a trailer, and just, you know, how you're trying to work through it all and trying to make some sense of all the damage. And you know, you reach a point and sometimes you just kind of seemingly overwhelmed, and the wind was blowing and the dust. I remember seeing cowboys that were helping us, and the wind was so bad and the sand was blowing so hard, they would pull their hat completely down and strap a set of horse hobbles around their brim just to keep their hat on. And, you know, I think I saw one, remember one was a set of goggles on, the sand was blowing so bad. But anyway, this friend showed up with his trailer and his son, and he said, look, I'd be willing to take these doggies for you. And he took all those doggies and took them off our hands while we were dealing with that. And then he came back in about a month or 3 weeks later when he had them all straightened out and going well. And he said, here, your calf's back. I mean, you know, all those kind of things that neighbors and friends do for each other. And then we got calls after that from people in the industry that said, well, we know you're out of grass. We know of somebody in another place that might have some grass. And so, you know, it's a rallying effort. And I think that speaks to, you know, people involved in the industry.
Yes, sir. I remember one story, correct me if I don't get it quite right, but it really kind of impressed me about that fire. Stanley, I believe, was the gentleman driving the Toyota pickup.
It was his brother, actually, Jerry.
It was Jerry. Okay. Mm-hmm. So right. Jerry and Stanley were also brothers, and
right.
They worked many years for the Haleys.
Yes.
And he had gone to cut some fence or something down at the south end, and
yes.
the wind was blowing out of the south, and he cut the fence, you know, so the cattle could hopefully get away and survive. And he turned around and was coming back to the headquarters, going as fast as he could on a dirt road, and that fire was blowing so hard and moving so fast it literally passed him in the pickup.
It passed. It did. It just. He couldn't stay out in front of it in the pasture.
And if it hadn't been going that fast, it would have been even worse.
Yes, it was just horrible. And that, I think that pickup is still at my brother's place today. Just all sides scorched up on it all, and just
it ran till he got there.
And reminder.
Then ran no more.
The things. But anyway, that's just all part of facets of this business. That, you know, you have to be committed. You have to be in for the long haul, or it's probably not a business for you.
And I guess we'll go look, you know, it does come back after.
It does.
And we know that properly used, fire is a good tool.
Absolutely.
But a wildfire is a whole nother beast.
Well, and, it's something you haven't planned for.
Yeah.
You wake up the next morning, you're dealing with it.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. You know, like that place that I've described, the next summer was kind of dry. But the summer after that, it went to raining, and the fresh growth, nature's way of rejuvenation. And the cattle, it was just marvel to see how they did in that second year after the fire, because they were eating fresh grass.
that had
rest
rested for a
plants
little while after
that
the
had the
fire.
opportunity basically to have been rested. So absolutely, it's a good tool, and it's a tool that I'm not opposed to using. In our part of the country here, you know, it's good for brush and grass. You say clean things up, but it is difficult to manage. Like you mentioned, Stanley, and of course both those brothers, the fire caught the one, and the other one had lived through lots of other ones. And you know, when you talked about burning fire, he'd just get the cold sweats nearly. He would say, "Look, you know, it's hard to manage, in spite of your best efforts. It's just, and you know, it has the capability of getting away so fast, even in spite of all the things that, you know, I can, like I say, I can tell you fires around here that have gotten away from people that were doing their best to manage them. But anyway.
I was talking with your son John last night a little bit, and he was telling me about one of the fires recently. Not a real bad one, but the sheriff came by and woke him up because he couldn't see it because of the barn. And he had mentioned that this wheat field here directly behind us is a pretty good, helps a lot on you know, for a fire break here for the house.
Yes.
It tends to funnel the fire over here where they can get it put out a little easier if it's not a real big one, and
You
some of
know,
that.
I mean, the short answer is this field that you're looking at right here, which is green wheat in the wintertime. And of course up here we have winter. We frost typically mid October, sometime mid to, you know, middle October. So, you know, our grass is dormant. Obviously the fuel is dry because it's, you know, dead fuel. And so it provides a real, you know, it's a, you know, it's a fuel for a fire. And, you know, if you look to the southwest and those hills in the distance, you know, typically we get a lot of southwest wind here. And with that dry fuel load, it can get dangerous. And that's one reason, you know, this grazing from a wheat standpoint, it's not really that big a deal in terms of an economic deal, but it's one reason we do it here for this headquarters where we are is a buffer. That green wheat allows, you know, the fire department or somebody here to have a little bit of time, hopefully, to address that fire before it gets right on top of you. And so just from a buffer standpoint, so to speak. And so as you can see, I think I was describing that line, and she asked a very good question, Casey did, about the, you know, intensive grazing. And as I was describing earlier, this country was typically a section or maybe a little more in a pasture, but the windmills would water the cattle that, you know, would run in that section. But typically, if they didn't have a solar, it didn't have electrical power, like an electric line going there where they could have a submersible, which in a lot of cases they didn't, you know. So they would just be able to water the cattle that would run in that pasture, and in those days, that was sufficient, that was good. But as time went on, and you know, as we get to where we realize the benefits of using grazing techniques in a more intensive way, especially particularly at certain times of the year, like now in the spring, get a graze on these early flush of weeds or this grass, and well, we didn't have the capability of watering. So what are you going to do? We live with them and take them to the creek or something? So that's why you see these stakes and us putting in a system that's going to allow us to be grazed. And another thing we plan to do with that is put waterings in places on the ranch. And sometimes the grazing culture is, you know, cattle like to eat what's their favorite thing, kind of like we do as humans. Like we want to eat a ribeye steak tonight, right? If we could get somebody to get it. But they would like to eat on certain parts of the pasture, and that's just where they like to be. We're going to use that water, hopefully, to move them. So it has a twofold purpose. Hopefully some grazing distribution in places without fencing, just to draw them to a certain area where they will come and go through that area to graze. And also, we think over time that, you know, it won't come back in the first, you know, maybe even 5 years. But if you amortize that over a decade or two, the watering costs will be down. So that'll be a benefit for the next generation, right?
Y'all, wildlife and stuff is another thing that I think benefits tremendously off of what ranchers do with their water for livestock. But y'all are pretty close to the Canadian River, but there's a whole lot of country out west that doesn't have live water on it. And if it weren't for, wells and what y'all do with, keeping windmills up and keeping solar pumps up, and I know I remember down here somewhere there was some overflow that y'all had built for the quail on some of your water. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I think another reason, part of the reason we like to do what we do, is just to be with the wildlife. We're here. We get to see them in their natural habitat. You can be working cattle and be out horseback early some morning, and you can just see a coyote doing his thing, or just look out and see a hawk in the tree like on his morning hunt or whatever, and the deer and the just to be with the Lord's creatures out here is a benefit of what we get to do. So it's nice to just be able to see them and view them in their natural habitat. And so things that we do, I guess you were trying to allude to, they do benefit by, before there was waterings away from the stream, they would have to be forced all the way to the streams. And now they probably get better distribution and more populous because they do have, kind of like the livestock, they're able to disperse in areas that they wouldn't have always been able to disperse. Not to say they wouldn't ever go there,
Right.
but they travel through probably
Right.
more often, and